If you've been around these parts for any length of time, then you know our favorite stories are the ones with happy endings. We like to think that good triumphs over evil, love conquers all, and we get to ride off into the sunset with our heads held high and a big smile on our face. But sometimes life doesn't end the way we want it to, and good guys die, or at least run off into the sunset alone. One of the earliest tales we know is one that has stuck with us through the ages. After Cain killed Abel, his brother, out of jealousy, God put a mark on him, and he walked away from the garden, leaving everything he knew behind. He wandered aimlessly until he found a place called Nod, which is probably where all those conspiracy theories about Nod being aliens came from. He built himself a home and started a family, and lived the rest of his days in isolation. That is how most of us remember the story of Cain, a tragic tale of betrayal, murder, and isolation. But what if I told you that the story didn't actually end there? What if it was just getting started? Let's dig into this and find out. Cain was definitely the black sheep of the family, but he wasn't an only child. He had a younger brother named Abel, who was basically the total package. He was handsome, hardworking, and was always able to get on God's good side. It's hard not to be a little jealous when someone else gets all the glory, especially when it seems like they don't even try. Like, why does Abel get to be perfect? I mean, talk about having your cake and eating it too. When it was time for Abel to bring God a gift, he brought a perfect lamb, while Cain brought fruit from the ground. Both offerings were well received, except Abel's was better because of course it was. So Abel got all the praise and all the glory, and Cain got, well, nothing. And then something snapped. The jealousy overwhelmed him, and he did something unspeakable. He murdered his brother. Ow. Now, everyone knows that killing your sibling is wrong. It's just not okay to kill anyone, really, but especially not your brother, because you're supposed to look out for each other. If anyone deserved your protection, it was Abel. So yeah, no excuses. God. Cain crossed a line that day, and God wasn't about to let him forget it. When God asked him, "Where's your brother?" he responded with a, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Meaning I'm not responsible for what happened to him. The audacity. God was furious, and he let Cain know it, cursing him for what he did. Now, you might be thinking, that's harsh, man. I mean, couldn't God have just sent him to jail or something? Well, in this case, God's punishment fit the crime. You see, God put a mark on Cain so that whoever found him would know that he was a murderer and leave him alone. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. This is the same curse that's placed on those who kill vampires. The mark could also be seen as a warning to other people, telling them to stay away from Cain. And when he heard this prophecy, he panicked. If people recognized him, they'd kill him. So he ran away from everything he knew and loved and tried to hide in the shadows. He walked and walked until he reached a place called Nod. This is where things get weird, though, because Nod is never explained. Some believe that it was a physical location somewhere near the Garden of Eden. Others believe that Nod was a metaphor for exile, saying that Cain wasn't really going anywhere. And yet others believe that Nod stood for aliens, saying that Cain was actually running away from extraterrestrials who had come to Earth in the past. They say the Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels and humans. So perhaps they wanted to wipe out the bloodline that dated back to Adam. What's interesting is that Nod is mentioned again in the Book of Jubilees, which is part of the ancient text known as the Apocrypha. Here it says that Cain wandered for 13 years before he reached Nod. And when he got there, God spoke to him and said, "Behold, you are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand, which have defiled her, and you shall be driven from the face of the earth." It goes on to say that if anyone killed Cain, they wouldn't receive the same mark of shame that he carried, and instead, their hands would be clean. So if Nod was a real place, it makes sense that people would want to stay away from it, since it was tainted by the first ever murder. If Nod stood for aliens, then it would make sense that they'd avoid it for other reasons. But what if Nod wasn't a place at all? What if it was a state of being? What if Nod was hell? Perhaps God was trying to tell Cain that his soul was stained by his actions, and there was no coming back from that. And maybe Cain was never really walking around on the earth at all. Maybe he was trapped inside it. Regardless of what Nod actually was, Cain made himself a new home there, and he settled down and started a family, and everything seemed to be okay. In fact, it seemed to be great. In Genesis 4:17, it says that Cain went on to build a city, and people began to fear God because of what had happened to his son. And that might sound sweet, but it's really not, because it's the first mention of worshiping false gods in the Bible, of course. It's important to remember that Eve was tricked into eating from the tree of knowledge, which could be considered a false god, if you will. So it wasn't really a surprise that people would fall prey to worshiping false idols. Moving forward, though, Cain's descendants became builders and musicians and warriors, and some say sorcerers too. They created cities, helped shape culture, and spread across the world. People like Enoch, who was taken up to heaven after walking with God, and Lamech, who took a second wife after Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. And then there was Jubal, who was credited with inventing the harp, and Jubal, who invented bows and arrows. They were a powerful bunch, but they were also forever haunted by their past, knowing that the sins of their father would forever be attached to their name. Of course, the Bible goes on to tell the story of another great leader from Cain's line, Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter. He's often depicted as a cruel tyrant who tried to take over the world and was eventually killed by his own grandfather, Noah. This is where the story typically ends. The good guys win, and we live happily ever after, except that might not be the case. You see, in the ancient Sumerian epic, known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, Nimrod is immortalized as a demigod. In the story, he's 2/3 god and 1/3 human, and he's said to have ruled over a vast empire. But as the story goes, the gods grew tired of his rule and decided to flood the earth to wipe out humanity. But they spared Utnapishtim, a man who was warned of the impending doom and given instructions on how to build a boat to survive the disaster. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. This story of a great flood that wipes out humanity was a common theme in many cultures, including the Babylonians, the Greeks, and the Hindus. But we're focusing on the biblical account here, where Noah is the one chosen to build an ark and save his family and 2 of every animal. Now, this is significant because it goes against the idea that Nimrod was immortal. In the Bible, it says that Nimrod's empire fell apart after Babel, which is interesting because the Tower of Babel is right next to the Garden of Eden. Coincidence? I think not. Perhaps the true history of the world is one that we don't know, hidden away from us in a way that we can't understand it. Or maybe it was lost to time long ago when the flood destroyed everything that came before it. But maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than we're letting on. Maybe there's a reason why Cain was given a second chance. Maybe it was so that his bloodline could carry on the sins of his father and show us the darkness that lies within. Or maybe it was so that they could teach us valuable lessons about life, death, and everything in between. It's up to you to decide what you believe, but one thing's for sure. The story of Cain and Abel isn't just a tale of betrayal and murder. It's a story of hope, redemption, and the power of family. And remember, until next time, stay safe, stay curious.